Back with another episode of... Dun, 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 dun.
No.
Why don't you just like it the way I might do my intros?
Oh, gosh. It's because I need you to... It's honest feedback. And I would like you to do a better one.
Okay.
But we'll save that for next time.
All right. Well, let's get started. What do you want to...
Yeah. Okay, so today's topic is one that is often requested, but it's quite a heavy one. So, yeah. So it's actually one we get asked about a lot, and it's sort of just about having kids after a pregnancy loss. I don't really know I don't know what direction people are sort of asking that question from, but I guess I'll sort of let you start and talk about like what it was like for you and all that stuff, and then we'll sort of go from there.
Oh, gosh. I know that I'm going to be shedding tears a lot. I will say it's definitely a very difficult journey. Pregnancy loss is not easy, and I'm sure, as much as I hate saying that, like, I'm sure there's a lot of people that can relate to that. I think what's worse is you've had the pregnancy loss and you're grieving as is, and then the need and desire to be able to carry another child is so strong. In a way, it's because I think, like, you think that it's your fault. Like, your body wasn't able to carry this child, and so now you want to be able to carry another child just so you can tell yourself that you can do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think there's another aspect to all of this, and that our community doesn't really talk about. It is how men grieve the process. Right?
Flip the script on me. Okay.
No, I mean, it's necessary, right? Like, women tend to, like, be more outspoken about their loss, but there isn't conversation around how couples cope together or how men cope through the process. So I would like to hear your stance on how did you cope, or what was going through your head while we were doing all of this.
Yeah, I don't know. So, how did I cope? It's weird, right? So, as a guy, my coping was compartmentalized in a couple different ways, right? The primary thing was, or the two primary things were, obviously one is just, the loss of a child. Mm-hmm. And, I'm logical. I don't believe in heartbeat or life at conception, all that other stuff, right? But there's obviously, when we made it over the hump into the second trimester, that's where I was like, okay, no, this is life, this is it. And then we thought we were sort of free and clear. So that was part of it, and then the other part was just, in some ways it was the harder part for me, which was not being able to help you. Right? Like, it was just being there for all of those things and all of the ER visits and the doctor visits and all those things. And, like, I remember when we found out that we're not having the baby. And, like, you were bawling your eyes out. I think that was the only time that I cried. And
I remember just coming out after we had lost the baby. I came into the room, and I remember just looking at you, and I was like, he's gone. I think that's the part that I remember, and I just remember just crashing into your arms. And I looked up, and you were bawling, and I was bawling.
Yeah. Yeah, but, like, that's the thing, right? Like, I think most people would think that we were both crying about the loss, right? I was not. I was crying because I couldn't do anything to help you. The loss I grieved on my own, in silence, right? Many a night, when I was putting Elise down for bed, there's a book that your cousins had gotten us, Oh, the Wonderful Things You Will Be.
Oh, God.
And she was obsessed with that book for a little while after everything happened. And, when I read the book, I just kept thinking about, like, everything that Dean could have been or would have been or whatever, right? So yeah, I mean, I grieved the loss on my own, and yeah, so that's how I dealt with it. I will say though, I was not ready to have a second child again, right? It was one of those things that like I wasn't ready to see you go through everything again, but I knew you needed it. It was like this thing where I was just like, I don't want to go through all this again, and I have so much
I was
admiration and
scared.
respect for all the families who keep trying, because I was like, God forbid something happens a second time. That's it. We're having Elise, and that will be
And
our
I
only
thought
child.
that I was actually going through the same process when Azina was
Yeah.
that night. I was like, I am 37 weeks, and this doesn't feel normal to me. I am going to do this again, and I don't know if I can get back up. So even though we're talking about like just waiting the next morning to like see if Azina's okay, and then like I haven't really like gone into labor, like there's no, my water didn't break, it was just like I had started bleeding, and in my head I was just like, this is it. And the reason I drove myself that night at 1 o'clock in the morning was like, if I am dealing with this right now, I need to know right now. I can't wait till next morning to find out. But alhamdulillah, that wasn't the case.
Yeah. We got a healthy mama and healthy baby.
But man, that was definitely quite the trigger.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, every ER visit with Azina, like we went to the ER a lot with all 3 pregnancies. But, with Elise, I think it was this, obviously it's the fear of a first child, and you're like, oh, what's happening? What's not happening? We don't know.
But the thing was with Elise, I've heard of like statistics. I know that miscarrying happens or pregnancy loss happens and all of that stuff happens, right? But for some reason with Elise, like, I was like, no, I can't be.
Yeah, we can't lose. You don't. It's not a reality in your mind.
It's not a reality. You're like, I know this is like it happens, but I can't be part of that. Like, I am not going to be a part of this statistic.
Yeah. It's like this sort of like
it's
fallacy
just,
of like, oh, I'm healthy,
I'm
young,
I'm having my first child,
but then you
like
realize,
everything is great, we're doing the right things, we're eating the right things, and I remember I was like, I was having sugar, a lot of sugar, and I was like, I would like, I was relatively much more healthier when I had Elise, and after we became part of that statistic, I was like, oh man, it doesn't matter how healthy you are. It doesn't matter. Yeah. It doesn't matter what your
myths.
Like literally, the OBs gave me a green light. They were like, you're fine. You are good. Your scars healed from your previous cesarean. Yes, we're going to go the cesarean route again because it's pretty close to your previous pregnancy, which is fine. But like, you're healthy. Everything, your vitals are good. Baby's good. Everything is good. And then I was like, okay, great. And then you become the part of the statistic, and you're just like,
yeah,
me?
Yeah.
But why me? And then you start questioning your body, and you start questioning yourself, and it was like a whole different ballgame. But there's another thing that I wanted to touch on, and that's, couples grieve in their own ways. They talk about it. Obviously, I am more open about the pregnancy loss more so than you are.
Yeah.
And that's because that was my coping mechanism. I was like, I'm not going to let this pregnancy just be like a distant memory that I never talk about it in my life again. And I did it more so because I felt like people were trying to have me keep it under wraps.
Yeah.
And it was like, we would talk about it, and like, it's like, तुम क्यों रो रही हो? Like, तुम्हारा दूसरा हो जाएगा, And it was like, why are you crying? You'll eventually have another one. And I was like, this was still a child. This was still my child. It doesn't matter if I'm going to have another one. It doesn't matter if I'm going to have like 5 or 4 more. This was still my child, and I'm allowed to just remember this child.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
How do you feel about that? Like, how do you feel about like, and I know that like, my family's like were like my family was different, your family was different, and about how everybody processed this whole thing. But ultimately, the whole thing was like, you guys are okay. Like, you guys will be fine. You will have like eventually have another child. Like, like, why are you crying about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I get it, right? I don't like it, but I get it because you have to find a way to keep going, right? And I think that's what that is. It's so when you posted, I'm gonna take a step back, right? When you posted about the loss, you didn't talk to me about it. You just posted it. Like I didn't know we were going to make it public. I didn't know any of that was going to happen. So, because obviously we hadn't posted anything on about the pregnancy because we were first trimester and all that. But when you posted about it, I was sort of like taken aback, but I didn't say anything because I knew that you needed to do that to process. So I didn't say anything, and I was like, all right, whatever, we'll talk about it months down the line. But I think what really shocked me about it was the number of people in my own family, let alone the number of people we saw who were like, oh yeah, I've gone through this. I've gone through 3. I've gone through and I was just like, oh wow, like, in some ways it helped me when I was processing it to be like, there's so many, like it's, misery loves company in a way, but like in this sense, in a positive way, right? Like you realize you're not alone going through these things. There's other people. So I think that I'm a private person, but I think with some of these things, having a community that can help you, that can understand, and finding that you're not alone in your suffering can be helpful. And
I
that's
mean,
we had this conversation with another person where they're like, oh, like they were going through their own thing, not a pregnancy loss, thankfully, but they were going through their own thing, and the husband was like, oh, like, yeah, but everybody goes through this. What you're going through is what everybody goes through, and like I was sort of listening to the guy say that. I was like, nah, fam, like even if it is right, even if it, but like it helps so much for other people to see it and be like, oh, I'm going through that also, or I went through that also, and I still can't reconcile it, right? Because I'm still a very private person. Like part of that, which I'm sure a lot of people will see this and be like, oh yeah, you guys, your life is all plastered on social media, but there's a lot of things that that are ours that we keep to ourselves, despite our openness on social media, right? And so like I don't know how to balance or like even talk about like, oh, like, yes, I'm a private person, I like to keep certain matters private, but like we went through this, and I think it's extremely helpful and beneficial to be able to talk about these things. But I will say I was surprised as to how supportive my parents were, right? And I hope everybody has people like that in their lives. Obviously, my siblings were extremely supportive. Our families were very supportive, but like my parents are not emotional people, right? They don't they don't hugs and I love yous and all that stuff. Like it's not, we don't have that. And I remember, oh, that was the second time I cried. It was when we came back home from the hospital, and I was just sort of standing there, and you were crying with everybody, and like my mom, it just came and gave me a hug, and I just like lost it. And my dad came and gave me a hug, and I just like completely lost it. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I would just say like I was terrified of having a second or trying again.
yeah.
Right.
I know that whole process drove me nuts. I mean, the pregnancy itself, I was like very scared of, and I'm like any time, like I didn't feel confident, and plus I had AG on top of that, right? Like I was so sick throughout my pregnancy, and then Elise had pneumonia, and we were in Utah for a long time, and I actually thought at that moment when we were taking care of Elise, I was like,
Yeah.
I'm going to actually lose this child, but that's fine because I need to worry about this child right now. And that was when I thought my body was giving up. And alhamdulillah, we made through that as well. But yeah, I was super scared throughout the process. But the time frame between like a losing the child and then conceiving again is the most excruciating process ever, because it drives you mentally insane. And I wish we had spoken about that in that time frame, when I think I had that breakdown in the closet.
Yeah.
So I bought like these 100 or 200 like HCG strips. And every time like my cycle would come around, I would like check before my cycle even came. And it was just like, and I remember when I like pulled out all my tests and I was sitting in the closet one day and I was just crying into the ground, just like my head cradled into the ground. I'm just crying and crying. And you come in and I was just like, I'm going crazy. Look at this. I'm going crazy. And I gave up. That night I was like, you know what? Fine. Whatever. But yeah, it drove me nuts. Like, I think it was because I was recovering, like not recovering, but I was working through PPD from a previous pregnancy. Then we had the loss, and then, so yeah, it was a lot.
Yeah. No, I remember it driving you crazy, and I like, again, like, see, it's, as a guy, like, I don't have context, right? Like, I don't, like, I try to be empathetic, I try to have, try to understand, but like, I don't have context, right? Because I'm never scared of never being able to have another child.
Yeah.
Right? That's not a fear for me, right? And then also like again, my way of sort of trying to get past it, trying to go through it, was the idea or the notion that like Dean had trisomy 18. It had nothing to do with anything. It was 1 in a billion chance, and it happened, and we were just the unlucky recipients of that. And so I was like, that, why be scared? But I understood
then,
that you were scared, like you had vocalized it. So I was like, okay, cool, this is what you need.
But even then, right? Like there were signs there, right? Like it had nothing to do with me, but then it also felt like it had everything to do with me. It was such a weird place to be in, because you're like, trisomy 18 isn't anybody's fault, right? It is, like it's chromosomes, like it's nothing to do with your body. But I felt like it did have. I was like, well, I'm carrying it. Did I like mess up the DNA? Did I mess up like the genetics of the baby? Like you think of these things, even though like your mind knows it's not scientifically correct.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a lot to process, and I think we're all truly on the better end of things, that we were able to conceive and have, alhamdulillah, another child. But my heart really does go out to people that try and try and try and haven't been able to find their rainbow.
Yeah. And I would also just say, like, I think it's important for people to recognize that you're not going through this alone.
Yeah.
Right. And like talking about it is helpful, right? Like I think it's extremely helpful. Like whether you talk about it with family or friends, or talk to a therapist or whoever, like it's extremely helpful to just get it out there, recognize you're not going through it alone.
And I think it's also important to, we can agree
and don't blame yourself.
Yeah.
And don't let anybody blame you.
Yeah. And even we can agree to disagree on this. And I know there's a lot of people who are very traditional in the way they think and process things, but it is really important for you to talk to your partner.
Yep.
It needs to be something that you talk to your partner, because the grief itself is so heavy that you need to be there for each other more so than anything else. All right. Well, this is
as much as we want to talk about this for right now. Maybe another day.
We can talk about it another time. If you guys have more questions and you want to ask things more in depth, we can definitely address it. But for now, like, this was our experience and how we processed and navigated through the entire thing. But we'll see you guys later. And it's a wrap.